While it's technically possible to do this swap with the engine in the car, I'm going to recommend you take the whole engine and transmission assembly out. I'm not going to cover engine removal in this video to save time, but if you check the online manual, it has a great section that goes over step by step of what you need to do. When you get the transmission, make sure it has the release fork with it. You also need a clutch and flywheel that matches the transmission. The transmission code will be on a sticker near the starter at the front of the transmission. I have the years and transmission codes listed down there in the bottom right. You also want to make sure you get the clutch bolts and the flywheel bolts. You also need the manual transmission starter. You'll need the mount bracket, and bolts for the transmission mount. If you want to use the stock rubber mount, you'll need to get longer bolts and drill holes into the fender well. However, there's a new adapter mount by Motive Force Performance that uses the automatic transmission mount holes, but locates a mount to match up with the manual transmission bracket. I'll have more on these options later on. The rest of the things you need are the pedals with all the mount bolts. Not pictured here is the gas pedal, you also need that as well. You need the shifter cables with the transmission bracket, also the washers for securing them to the transmission arms. You need the complete shifter assembly with the mounting bolts and mounting bushings, and the clips for the cables. You'll want these brake and clutch line brackets from inside the engine bay, and you want the whole hydraulic system with the bolts. You also want this plate that plugs a hole under the manual shifter. For the console, you'll want the shift boot, the set plate, and the 4 screws for the set plate. You also need the wiring harness from the manual engine. Things you don't need are the drive shafts and the half shaft. It's the same between the automatic and manual transmission. Remove the center console and unplug all the connectors from the automatic shifter. Remove the front heat shield from underneath the car. Remove the 2 bolts holding on the shifter cable cover and the 4 nuts that secure the shifter. If you have 4-wheel steering, 2 of them will be very hard to get to. Disconnect the cable from the shifter, then pull the shifter. Pull the cable out from underneath. Remove the lower dash trim and column covers. Above the gas pedal, there's a cover where the master cylinder should go. Remove these 2 nuts, then push the cover out. Before this next step, make sure your steering wheel is centered. Remove the steering U-joint in the engine bay. Once you remove the bolts, you'll need to slip it up to clear the bottom shaft, then you can slip it off the top shaft. Remove the plastic column cover. There's 2 clips and 2 plastic nuts. Disconnect all the column wiring, then remove the 2 bolts and 2 nuts that are holding it on. Disconnect the booster rod from the pedal, then remove all these nuts to hold the pedal assembly to the firewall. You can also push the booster back into the engine bay a little bit for more clearance. Once you drop the pedals down a bit, you'll have more room to disconnect the throttle cable and the cruise control cable. Remove the interlock control unit from behind the console, then pull all the extra automatic wiring out towards the passenger side. Rip this square section out of the firewall sound dampening. Remove this plug at the bottom center of the firewall. If you got your pedals from an 88, you'll just have this one clutch switch, which is the one that kicks off the cruise control when you push the clutch in. If the pedals came from an 89 up, you'll have the second switch higher up, which is the one that stops you from starting the car without having the clutch pushed in. We're not going to be using that switch in this swap, so you can just remove it if you have it. If you're not going to run cruise control, you can also remove that lower switch as well. Otherwise, leave it set up like this with the connector plugged in and the length of wire coming out. Start by hooking the cables onto the gas pedal, then let it hang loose. Guide the gas pedal through the middle of the other pedals when you install them. In the engine bay, replace the two clutch and brake line brackets if you have them. Then install the hydraulic system. Install the master cylinder nuts, then hook the rod to the pedals. Before you reinstall the column, you'll want to remove the interlock system from it. Now reinstall the column, center the steering wheel, and reinstall the steering U-joint. Plug the column wiring back in and reinstall the cover. Reinstall the column covers and lower dash trim. To plug the hole for the automatic shifter cable, you can get the plug from the manual car, or you can take this part off the automatic cable, fill the hole with silicone, and use that. To plug the hole under the shifter, just silicone this cover plate in place. Feed the shift cables in from the engine bay. Move these 4 plugs into the automatic shifter holes. Now install the manual shifter. Install the shift boot on the console. You can now install the lower console trim, the console, and the shift knob. Make sure you still have access to all that extra automatic wiring in the footwell. I pulled this connector block off the automatic shifter, loop the large black-white wire, then tap into the green, black, and yellow wires. Depin everything else. After that, plug it into the connectors you pulled into the passenger footwell. The wires you tapped into are for the reverse lights. Remove the kick panel, then pull the carpet away from the passenger footwell. Remove the 4 bolts that are securing the ECU mounting plate. The automatic control unit is on the left side. Unplug both of its connectors. After that, remove it from the plate. On the smaller automatic control unit connector, find the red, white, and white, black wires. Cut them off near the connector, and using fully insulated disconnect terminals, connect them to the wires you spliced into earlier. It doesn't matter which way you hook them up. Now you should have working reverse lights. Put everything in the footwell back together, and when you bolt down the plate, make sure the new wiring isn't resting on a sharp edge or pinched anywhere. Now we're going to hook the clutch switch to the cruise control unit. Cut this pink wire as far from the cruise control connector as you can, then add a disconnect terminal to it. On the clutch switch connector, add a disconnect terminal to one of the wires and a ring connector to the other. It doesn't matter which order. Plug the connectors back in, plug in the disconnect terminals, then for the ring connector, ground it somewhere near the fuse box. Now the cruise control should kick off when you push in the clutch pedal. Finally, swap the manual transmission wiring harness onto your engine. When you go to bolt the manual transmission onto your automatic engine, you'll probably find this water pipe is interfering with the shift arms. You can either install the manual transmission water pipe, or just cut off about 4 inches from the automatic one. Traditionally, to use a manual transmission mount in the automatic chassis, you'd have to remove these black plugs in the engine bay, drill all the way into the fender well, then use longer bolts with fender washers to secure the mount. It's not ideal, but it's your only option because these holes aren't threaded on the automatic chassis. However, Motive Force Performance now offers this conversion mount that uses the automatic transmission mount holes, but lines up with the bracket on the manual transmission. Either way, once you have this mount sorted out, you're ready to reinstall the motor and transmission. Just follow the steps in the shop manual again to get it back together. I did this conversion while we were also doing an engine swap, so it's possible I missed a few small things, but this video should get you 99% of the way there.